when it's all right. Wendy is unfortunately unable to join us due to having a heavy cold. So I don't think there are any other apologies. And the second item is to approve the minutes of the meeting held on the 5th of December. Were there any questions on those minutes? No. Okay. Well, I propose that they are accepted, seconded by Lucy, and I presume everyone is in favour. We have no public questions and statements, no items of urgent business. Are there any declarations of interest? No. No member questions at this time. Johnny, you're okay? Just chip in if you want to. Yeah. Recommendations from Cabinet Working Parties. First of all, the Cabinet Working Party for projects and the minutes have been received. Were there any questions on those minutes? No. And secondly, with the Planning Policy and Built Heritage Working Party for the 14th of November, and secondly, the 12th December. And Andrew, I don't know if there's anything you wanted to say on those. Thank you.
Yeah, good morning, everybody. Happy New Year. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yes, we debated the coastal adaptation supplementary planning document at the November planning policy working party. It's part of a project of a joint steering group with East Suffolk, Great Yarmouth, the Broads Authority and Coastal Partnership East, following a statement of common ground in 2018 to provide a planning strategy for a whole approach to coastal management, and it enables in recommending this to Cabinet for the public consultation to start this month. Just want to mention one particular novel feature with it, and that is in the rollback provision. Relocated property from coastal erosion areas need not necessarily be rebuilt in safer areas on a like-for-like basis. If there's justification for properties being enlarged or different, then it will go to Development Committee, and providing there's no harm to the immediate surroundings with the proposal, then it will be permitted. So the previous like-for-like rule, as it were, has been relaxed. As regards the December working party and a review of policies in the draft local plan, we've made significant progress after a long meeting to consider everything in the local plan as regards policy revision. The working party have requested some modifications to policies, in particular in relation to allocating employment land, to see if we can twin with residential allocated sites wherever possible. So there's a little bit of work to do on that, but the recommendations do allow for minor modifications to be made by the planning policy manager and myself as portfolio holder moving forward. Just a word, we are hopefully going to arrange a special meeting in February to consider the local plan so that we can put it to the inspector by the end of March at the latest. So just to remind everybody of that. But having said all that, Mr. Chairman, I heartily recommend the recommendations in both submissions from ONS, as it were.
Okay. Any questions?
Thank you.
No? Go ahead.
No questions, Mr. Chairman. Just very happy to second this, and I'm particularly proud of our coastal adaptation supplementary planning document.
Okay, fantastic. Any other questions? Do we need to? We don't need to propose and second these, do we? Yeah. Okay. So in respect of all three items, if you're happy to propose, and seconded by Angie, and presume that's accepted by everyone. Yeah. Okay. Fantastic. Item 8, recommendations from Ovian Scrutiny Committee. There are No recommendations. Councillor Dixon did send his apologies. Item 9, business continuity policy and business continuity management framework. And yes, I don't know if either, yeah, go ahead, Nigel, if you want to kick off, thank you.
Well, just to introduce, there's a requirement under the Civil Contingency Act 2004 that places the duty on councils to have a business continuity policy and management framework in place. This has been before GRAC, but with your indulgence, I'd like to hand over to Officer Alison, just to add any detail.
Yeah, thank you. Alison, feel free.
So this is the result of an audit of procurement and contract management, which was NN 2107. And there was an audit recommendation that came out of that, that management would review and update the business continuity plan and other relevant policies, specifically including reference to review of contracts. And partly as a result of that, and partly as a result of changes that I'd identified, I wanted to bring in the whole suite of business continuity documentation is being reviewed, and these are the first 2 documents in that suite. So what I've done is we've separated out the business continuity policy, the what we will do, from the business continuity management framework, which is the how we will do it. And I have also expanded the business continuity management framework so that it is more comprehensive and our managers are very clear on the requirements of what goes into a business continuity plan and the business impact analysis. And they'll be doing that in the next couple of months. This will help us to become more resilient as a council, and will also help other colleagues such as Sean Kelly in IT in terms of software and recovery when we have any disruptions. So the recommendation is that full council adopts the revised business continuity policy and the business continuity management framework as they stand.
Okay.
Happy to answer any questions.
Are there any questions? No? Okay, well, thank you again, Alison. Brilliant bit of work and very easily understood and nicely set out, etc. presented. So thank you for that. I'd be proposed by and seconded by Richard, and all of those in favour, please. Thank you. That's unanimous. Okay. So the next item is the council policy in relation to the regulation of Regulatory Powers Act 2000. And Nigel, I don't know if there's anything you wanted to say to introduce this again.
Again, I'm going to hand over to Council Officer Sayer, but as a result of a periodic review and audit, members are required to be aware of this document under law, and that's why it comes before us quite regularly. But I'd like to hand over to Alison to give us a much more informed opinion on it.
Okay. Steve, isn't it? Is that correct?
Yes, me. No, that's fine. Thank you, members. So this report, as Councillor Lloyd has said, comes before you on a regular basis to comply with the Home Office's guidance around elected members having oversight of both the policy and any activity that we've undertaken. So the Regulation of Investigatory Powers Act sets out or governs the use of directed covert surveillance and of covert human intelligence sources. Basically, it enables the local authority to legitimately impact on the human rights of individuals where there is a justified case for doing so. This policy sets out those provisions and the guidance to officers to enable them to do so in a compliant manner. The provisions are audited, if you like, on a regular basis by the Investigatory Powers Commissioner's Office, IPCO, who independently oversee the use of those powers. And so this report basically does 2 things. It updates the policy and procedure for the directed surveillance. It also introduces a new policy to deal with internet and social media research and investigations. The reason that we've separated or covered them in separately is because effectively, in order to use the provisions of the Regulation of Investigatory Powers Act, it has to come with a sanction, a potential sanction of a criminal offence that is punishable by imprisonment of up to 6 months. And obviously that is quite infrequently used, and so used by a relatively small number of officers in the authority. However, as you can imagine, the internet is available to everybody. And so to make sure that we are not impacting people's human rights when officers are going about their everyday business of, and officers from across the authority will look at people's social media or internet presence. So the provisions that we have in this policy basically means that we are not impacting adversely on people's human rights inadvertently. So it will be something that is more widely used by officers across the authority. And the other piece that is the second piece that is in here is just to update members as we're required to on the use of the RIPA provisions across the year. And in this case, it's outlined in the report. We have used a covert human intelligence source on one occasion this year, clearly for fairly obvious reasons in terms of an ongoing investigation. The details of that are not provided, but you have been advised that we have used covert human intelligence source on one occasion in the last 12 months. Thank you.
Okay. So I gather the document is easier for officers to use now in this format and following this review, but my anticipation is that it looks somewhat like other authorities' policies.
Yes, we have for some time now used the services of a trainer to train our officers in the use of the various provisions. That trainer also offers the provision of some template documents. And we took that a number of years ago, and over the period of time since we took that document, in effect, we have added to it based on either updates in the codes of practice, updates in various other sort of guidance provided by government, etc. But also in response to recommendations made during those inspections by IPCO. And so over a period of time, that document effectively had been added to somewhat piecemeal. Things had been added into it. It was a compliant document, but it would become quite difficult to follow in terms of actually making really good use of it, making it really easy for officers to follow through. So this document basically has been retemplated. All the information is in there. It's been updated accordingly, but effectively it does follow a number of other authority approaches and practices. So yes, it's one that we're confident in.
Okay, thank you. And how often is this reviewed?
So we review the document annually.
Okay.
And that sometimes means that there is nothing more than a very small number of changes. Sometimes if there are changes to codes of practice, it is more widespread. But yeah, to comply with best practice, we look at this annually.
Thank you. Okay, any questions? Eric and then Virginia.
Yes, I just noted with interest that it doesn't include CCTV cameras operated by town or parish councils, which my own town council, North Walsham, of course, does operate CCTV cameras. If there is any use of that material, it tends to be for the police, if there's been any incidents in the town. Now, my understanding is that if it's a criminal investigation with the police of the lead authority, that the RIPA regulations do not apply to them. Is that correct?
So the regulation of investigatory powers applies to every public body, including the police. This covers ourselves as a public body. There is a section on here in joint investigations. So we are clear on that. Under under section 18 on the document itself, page 12 of 46, there is a section on CCTV that does reference town centre CCTV systems, and that we don't have them, and some guidance around for officers about if we were to look at using the historic the legacy systems that we used to have. So there is some in there that we have had checked and is sufficient for our purposes.
Right, so I understand this covers council, but in terms of the RIPA requirements in relation to the police, because they're operating covert or surveillance operations continually over various things, that's something quite different.
Yes, so it would be for the police will have their own policies, they will have their own procedures, and they will have people who are dedicated to doing those authorizations. They will be used, as you rightly say, Councillor Seward, they will be using those provisions far more frequently than we do, because of the seriousness and nature of their investigations, and the potential sanctions that come with them.
Thank you. Virginia, and then Richard.
I'm interested in joint agency surveillance, point 23. And the example given here is precisely something undertaken with the police. But are there other agencies that might be involved in this? And how often does this sort of thing happen?
Our use of directed surveillance is infrequent anyway. So I think the last return to you was nil. Before this one, we've used it once. We use it very little. There are circumstances where we might work with the board's authority, or another public body, or even one of our regular registered social landlords, where we work in partnership on some of those more significant ASB issues, where effectively we might seek to work jointly. So there are those possibilities where we would work with others in as part of a wider a wider investigation into criminal activity or ASB that meets the threshold for this.
Okay, happy with that?
Does work with others mean that council staff would do the work on behalf of the others, or it would be a joint team operation? Could it be either or both, or what? Thank you.
Either, both, I think, in terms of the provisions. So we might have equipment that wouldn't be available to others. So it may be the use of our, we hold some CCTV wildlife type cameras that we can deploy. So it may well be that it's the use of our equipment in a joint operation, those type of things. So the circumstances of each individual would be considered on its merits and who would take the lead. There are probably few circumstances where the police wouldn't be the lead authority, but they may support us in a wider investigation that's probably, that has the potential to be more a local authority issue. So things that meet the 6-month imprisonment custodial sentence threshold for significant issues where it might be something such as fly tipping, something of a significant waste related nature, waste fraud, where it might sit more appropriately with the local authority to lead than the police, but the police would support it.
Okay, Richard.
Thanks, Chair. Just for a point of clarity, paragraph 19.1, ANPR on page 13 and 46 of the report. We have asked before whether we could use ANPR technology for car parks, and we were told we couldn't, but it just seemed to be, it doesn't engage with the RIPA if it's used for traffic flow and management. So I wondered if this, just for clarity, means we could now start using it for car parking.
So the provisions of RIPA relate to directed surveillance. So effectively, you would, I think what this says is if you were using ANPR, and bear in mind, this is a policy that is a cover-all from our point of view. So what this is saying is if you're using ANPR for the purposes of monitoring traffic flow, it's not covered by the Regulation of Investigatory Powers Act. However, if you're using it as a form of surveillance, so if we were looking, if for instance, we said to the police, and this might be another one, we're looking for a specific vehicle associated with criminal activity, then that would be directed surveillance and we would need to use the RIPA provisions. My understanding is that the issues around using ANPR for car park management, etc., is a different one than that from the provisions under RIPA. So this report does not cover that. And it is my understanding that there are some issues for a local authority using ANPR as in that way that you've described, but clearly that would be separate from this policy.
Yeah. So of course there is police ANPR in North Norfolk, and partially this authority helped fund that towards the end of the last administration, if you remember. So I suppose that might be used in the case of a fly tipping vehicle or something like that. But it of course hasn't been alongside the district council, but I'm aware it has been a successful use of that technology in North Norfolk. Yes, sorry, can I just check? Liz, did you indicate? Go ahead, and then I'll come to you, Andrew.
Thank you. Steve, my question was about the changes we've had with meetings, in that we're now doing a lot obviously online, and we're being recorded currently, and we're doing a lot of Teams meetings and Zoom meetings. Has that been covered in this, or does it not need to be covered in this? Because I can see possibilities where people's behaviour, etc., might be surveyed.
So I think that the answer is, in general, public meetings would not, if you present yourself in a public meeting, the surveillance of that or the recording of that is not directed. However, if you are there as a private individual, and that meeting you were looking at using that as in some way, shape or form as evidence of something, then it may possibly meet some of the internet and social media investigation side. I think what I would say is that the provisions around the Regulation of Investigatory Powers Act and directed surveillance is quite significant. So it's a very conscious step for authorities to take to use those provisions. Councils can use material or information that's gathered without the use of this, but effectively if you step into RIPA, if you're using the Regulation of Investigatory Powers Act provisions and getting an authorization, it is effectively once you've got it signed off by the court and providing you are compliant with all the requirements, it is an absolute defence for a local authority against any challenge under the Human Rights Act, because you've gone through the steps to prove that you can effectively breach someone's human rights, particularly Article 8 in relation to home and private life. The position is that you can infringe people's human rights to a degree, and from that point of view, any investigation, if you go onto someone's social media account to see what they're doing for any purpose, effectively as a public body, there is a degree. Going on once is probably not an infringement, but if you went on repeatedly, then it has the potential to be. So I think it's a question that, in answer to your question, probably not in terms of those meetings, unless you were gathering a wider picture, in which case we would look at the internet and social media investigations and say, keep a record of it, because it's not covered by RIPA. It's not It's not a direct of surveillance because it can't be covered by RIPA because the potential outcome of it is not likely to be a 6-month imprisonable sentence.
Okay.
So that we've gone beyond that in terms of some of that internet and social media to try and make sure that we are following best practice wherever possible by keeping a record and making sure staff are aware of what they can and can't do. So it's not covered by the report in general, but I think it would be covered by the more generic, by the RIPA provisions in general, but I think it would be covered by the internet and social media because of that online presence.
Andrew, go ahead.
Thank you, Steve, for the explanations you've given thus far. I just want to ask about training. Is training concentrated on those officers just involved in the surveillance operations, or is the training basically for all staff to ensure that we don't inadvertently fall foul of the regulations?
So we do specific training for those staff who are engaged in the use of the regulation of investigatory powers as part of their role. That's to make sure that they are compliant because they're more likely to undertake activity that would be required to be authorised under RIPA. In terms of more general staff awareness, it's not something that we have done significantly in the past, except for some awareness raising amongst teams via team meetings. So officers have in the past gone into team meetings and said, this is the sort of thing that you can't be doing. What we will be looking at doing, should you adopt the internet and social media policy today, is basically doing a more widespread rollout of information to staff, because I think that's the area where people are more likely to nip onto the internet to go and have a look to see what's happening over a case they're involved with, to look what that person's got on their Facebook page. It would be very easy to go and do that repeatedly, and that potentially has the potential to infringe their human rights. So it will be about making staff aware in a more general sense about those things.
Yes, I think I read somewhere in the report that if you're going on social media using your computer, that the computer then becomes a surveillance device, if I've read it correctly. So it was just a concern that staff are, generally, not just the team involved in surveillance, were well aware of that.
Yeah, and clearly we will make those staff who are, what we've attempted to do in the past is make staff who are more likely to be involved in that type of activity aware of the provisions, but there will be a wider rollout to a wider section of staff around the internet and social media provisions. So yeah, Steve's written me a note around benefit fraud audit recommendations. Do you want to just?
So there was, and Councillor Rest is in the room as chair of the Governance Risk and Audit Committee. We have got an outstanding audit recommendation from the partnership, Norfolk Internal Audit Partnership, which has undertaken a review last summer of all local authorities in the partnership and their response to management of benefit fraud particularly, and it suggested to us that we looked at appointing additional staff for that purpose. CLT undertook a risk assessment as to the level of fraud which the authority might experience, particularly around council tax support. And given our very high rate of council tax collection, we didn't feel it was justified at the time of receiving the audit recommendation that we could allocate additional officers, specific officers for that purpose. So your revenue staff are mindful of council tax fraud in the issuing of bills, and with your benefit staff in terms of requesting supporting documents. But again, if allegations of fraud were suggested to the authority, those officers could undertake some review of people's social media accounts to see whether they have a partner, for instance, if they were claiming single person discount. The authority historically did have a team of 3 fraud officers, but there were changes, I think back in 2015, 2016, where those officers TUPE'd across to the DWP. And so the observations made by the Internal Audit Consortium didn't sit comfortably with CLT. On receipt of that report, we have had that conversation with GRAC, and we said we would review the situation over a 12-month period, and therefore a further report would be presented to GRAC with any additional requirement for provision to be made for financial support to support the appointment of those officers this coming summer. So that's a work in progress. But in the context of RIPA and this policy, it could be that officers in revenues and the benefits team have a duty to be mindful of potential fraud and to minimise fraud, and could use the provisions of the policy in undertaking investigations or inquiries in that regard.
Okay, thank you, Steve. Well, thank you both, Steves. I think we've had a useful outline there. Were there any final questions before we move on? Okay, well, I'm happy to propose the acceptance of the policy. Is that seconded by Nigel, and all of those in favour, please? Yeah, that's unanimous. Thank you again. Item 11 is the Coastal Transition Accelerator Programme update and approval. Can I just ask, in respect of item 14, I presume we can possibly avoid any exempt information being used at this stage. Are we able to? So yeah, so that's understood by members. In respect to the item, Angie, I don't know if there's something you want to say to introduce us to it. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and good morning, everybody. I'm particularly excited to be bringing this to you this morning. I'm proud to say that our coastal team is respected nationally and has been for some time. We were given the largest share of Pathfinder finance, and our work with that has been nationally and internationally recognised as an exemplar. Whilst it has taken some 10 to 12 years to progress with our findings from Pathfinder, DEFRA have awarded us the opportunity to take adaptation to coastal change much, much further. We have before us a much more far-reaching chance to stabilise our communities and businesses. You will see in the recommendations we are asking some pretty unusual requests of you all. We must be able to move this forward without delay, and I don't think there is any directorate within this council that will not become involved in some way. We will be incorporating much of the work done by the LGA Coastal SIG Adaptation Working Group that I chair, such as CLIF, the possibility of insurance for property at risk from erosion, rollback, the part that surface water plays, and maybe even a change to building regs for replacement for properties. I must point out that the funding for this programme is not from the council's budget. It is direct from DEFRA in recognition that we will use it wisely and share our learning nationally. I ask, no, beg for your support, and if you have any questions, both Rob and I would be more than happy to answer them. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Martin or Rob, who's going?
Thanks very much. Okay, thank you very much, Angie. So as we know, coastal change is a major challenge for us in England, and particularly here in North Norfolk, and this is going to become more and more of a challenge moving forwards with climate change and sea level rise. I think Angie has sort of introduced that really, really well, and a lot of it is fairly well spelled out sort of in the report itself. over the last couple of years, the government policy statement and environment agency strategy for coast and flood have started to include sort of coastal adaptation and the words coastal transition. So looking to help individuals and communities adapt to coastal change. We've really been very fortunate to be identified alongside North District Council, alongside East Riding of Yorkshire Council, to be selected for the Coastal Transition Accelerator Programme. We now need to complete an outline business case and submit this for approval to access the full funding, which is approximately 14 million for this for North Norfolk. And the report also looks to set up appropriate governance for the programme to ensure that we progress this in an appropriate way. But we're also very well aware that it will take some time to get the ball rolling, to have the discussions with communities and individuals and develop some of these sort of the projects and the initiatives that we might want to do. With this in mind, there's already people at immediate need. So the report also seeks to provide some initial support, and it is only initial support to help with those individuals, businesses, etc., explore areas where they may need help. I'd like to sort of really stress that this is a great opportunity for us now to put the right things in place to help our coastal communities where we aren't going to be able to protect in the future, but also provide that learning which will help shape government policy around coastal transitioning and coastal funding sort of now and for the future. Thanks.
Thank you, Rob. Okay, well, fantastic. Whether Go ahead. I've got Nigel and then Virginia. There we go. I'm just trying to remember who indicated it, and then Lucy. Thank you.
Well, I just wanted to congratulate the coastal team and the portfolio holder, Angie, for the great work they've done in bringing this before us and for putting this council at the forefront on a national level with regards to coastal management. And the only point I'd just like to make is that, you know, climate change is mentioned throughout this report. And I'd like to bring members' attention to the fact that the vast sums of money that are actually needed to mitigate the costs of climate change. And so when it comes down to this council's budgeting with regard to climate change itself and reducing our own carbon footprint, it's money well spent.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
that's my point.
Thank you, Nigel. I'd agree. Virginia, go ahead.
Thank you. I'd also like to thank Angie and Rob and the team for this, because this is an enormous distinctive capability for this council. I think it's an example of where local government has actually led the way in doing something significant and seriously influenced central government. And I think it's also for those who always say, why don't you do things more quickly? Why are you so slow? I think it shows that to achieve something really quite serious and important, it takes years of dedication and good work and persuasion. And I think that's what's been achieved here. So yeah, well done, all of you. Thank you.
Thank you, Virginia. Lucy, go ahead.
Thank you. Again, thank you to Angie and the coastal team. I think the biggest thing that I want to say is actually to Rob, because you have listened to me over the last 3.5 years, relentlessly talk about the plight of Haysborough. And I think we had a meeting, was it a couple of weeks? Well, we've had Christmas since then, maybe 3 weeks ago, to talk about how the programme could look and what we could do differently and what we could learn. And I think from everything that I've heard from residents in Haysborough, we were really listened to. So even some slightly, I would say off the wall, but perhaps not, suggestions that have come from residents or things that I've put forward were not dismissed. So this feels like a really positive move for those communities that are stuck with nowhere else to go currently. And as Angie alluded to before, the amount of time between the Pathfinder project and this project is quite significant. However, it doesn't mean that the coastal team here have sat and done nothing for those 12 years, did you say, Angie? 12 years. it's just testament to the hard work and the wanting to solve a problem and wanting to support the communities that 12 years on we are in a stronger place. But on behalf of Haysborough residents, thank you.
Thank you, Lucy. Go ahead.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Yes, I'd like to just reiterate my thanks to Rob and his team for excellent work, to be one of only 2 authorities nationally to be successful in bidding for access to these funds from government, which hopefully will be topped up as inflation takes its effect. I've seen the report that that's a significant high risk to the project moving forward, and to Angie as portfolio holder for her work on this. It's extremely beneficial for this authority to be involved in this, and it's very pleasing to see that the work has been successful for this authority. Thanks, Chair.
Okay. Any last indications you want to speak? Well, thank you again from me, but everyone else, of course, as well. So I believe Angie proposed and seconded by Nigel, and all of those in favour of accepting, including the exempt appendix and proposals there. Thank you, that's unanimous. Okay. Well, that is the business of the meeting. I don't think we've got anything else we need to do. We've covered the business in doing that. So well, thank you everyone for your time, and look forward to seeing you at the next meeting. Thank you.